Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
And we're back from outer space. Well, not really, but just from our Christmas oblique Pauliness sabbatical and ready to go with a new year of fun and or frolics in the world of local and national politics. It's probably too late to wish anybody a happy new year, but let's hope everyone's new year is proving positive 15 days in.
Yeah, although it quite clearly isn't for some people, which we'll get to in a minute.
Indeed. Yeah, quite a lot. It's one of those things when we take a break, either nothing happens and we turn up and go, yeah, well, carry on, or the world of politics goes upside down in all sorts of directions. And I guess probably over last year, the majority of it was kind of at a national level, but we're starting the new year with a fairly seismic event in Portsmouth politics.
Indeed. Much as a shock. Well, there's been kind of a precipitation of a suspension of one Labour councillor, then a deselection of another, and then their expulsion, and that's basically repeated guest of the show, Councillor Cal Corkery from Charles Dickens Ward. So there seems to be a bit of things don't seem to be all quiet on the home front for them.
Yeah, and Cal has been very generous with his time to the podcast, and his politics is very different to ours. But he's always come across as a very committed local councillor. It's very clear he's got the respect of his residents. So shall I attempt to sum up the sort of first part of the story, or better still, have you got it was Cal that broke the news officially, although because we have our networks and our spies everywhere, we had probably picked this up. Don't laugh.
Networks and our spies. Okay. We do not have a network, and we do not have spies. Just to clarify that for anybody. But if you've got
wink.
No. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And we don't trade in gossip. But yeah, well, to give you kind of like the full timeline, it really actually it goes back to April 2018 in Charles Dickens, when a short while before the actual vote of the local election, Claire Rudy left the Labour Party, but that was too late to be amended on the ballots, and going on to win the seat as an independent, and then went on to form the Progressive Portsmouth People Group in September 2019 with ex-Lib Dem Councillor Jeanette Smith. In November 2018, the then sitting councillor, one of the other sitting councillors for Labour in Charles Dickens, Yahya Chowdhury, was deselected in favour of Cal to be the candidate for 2019. Cal, obviously, as we all know, went on to win the seat, and then followed in successive years by Kirsty Mellor and Yinka Adeniran. In December, just gone.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Quite a stir at the time, wasn't there? In terms,
there's been quite a bit of a stir. So it's I don't know, but I mean, Charles Dickens has the lowest turnout in local elections of any ward in the city, and I guess if you're a hardworking community campaigner or a hardworking local councillor, and to have this sort of thing happening, this doesn't help with countering the disengagement of people in local politics, does it? But in December 2022, so that's last December. Sorry, that just stopped in my head then for a minute because I can't get used to it being last year. Labour councillor for St Jude Ward, Judith Smythe, is suspended by the Labour Party whilst a complaint against her is investigated. The then group leader, Councillor Cal Corkery, gave her his and the local party's full backing. And then on the 9th of January, Cal announced on his Facebook page that he'd been deselected as the candidate for Charles Dickens, citing that some of the things that he'd cited, and I can go through some of the posts in a second that he's kind of made. He's citing that he was one of the things that was used as part of that being looked into was him being arrested in a protest against the decision to prorogue Parliament. But he was unarrested without any charge. And a Facebook post that he'd liked in 2017 and his former
16.
position. Oh, sorry, 2016, beg your pardon. And his former position as chair of the city's Momentum Group had all been used by the regional governing body, that's the South East Labour Party, as reasons to deselect him. And then yesterday, Cal posted that he'd actually been expelled from the Labour Party. So no one can say it better than Cal can. So shall I read? I'll abridge his post from the 9th of January, but the one on the 14th, I think is best read in full.
I think so. I think it would be appropriate to and again, just so that people are aware, we had invited Cal onto the show. I think Cal was very honest with us that everything is very raw at the moment. So now probably isn't the best time for him to talk to us and to you about it. But we are hopeful that in time we will get Cal back on the show and he can give us some more of the inside steer. But in the interim, you get to read the words.
Yeah, indeed. So let me just pop those up, and then I shall. Yeah, so the one in January, and these are on Cal's Facebook page. So, but yeah, his one from from about a week ago talks about the grounds for blocking him were from really standing appear particularly weak. The reasons given were being arrested at a peaceful protest against Boris Johnson's illegal prorogation of Parliament, despite being released without charge, liking an innocuous Facebook post in 2016 from a group which would go on to be proscribed by the party 5 years later, and having previously been chair of the local Momentum Group. This seems to be part of a national trend within the Labour Party whereby socialists and trade unionists are denied the opportunity to stand for selection as election candidates on spurious grounds. I believe the best chance we have for getting the Tories out and really changing this country for the better lies in a united and diverse Labour Party which represents the broad church of our movement. Being elected as a local councillor for the area I live in was an incredible privilege, and I'm proud of what we have achieved. In Charles Dickens' ward, we have supported hundreds of residents with local issues, in particular with a large number of housing problems, helping people to stand up for their rights to a decent, safe and affordable place to call home. I'm proud of the strong relationships our team in Charles Dickens has built with residents and community groups, which I know will have a lasting impact. I was an active, and he goes on to say, I was an active community and housing campaigner and trade unionist well before I was elected to the council, and look forward to continuing to play my part in fighting for a better world after my term on the council comes to an end. And that's signed off as Councillor Cal Corkery in January 2023. So, yes, he kind of lays out his side of the story there, doesn't he? And makes that really, really clear. And then yesterday, he went on with a follow-up post, remarkably, just days after announcing I've been blocked from restanding as a Labour councillor and suggesting this could be part of a trend against socialists and trade unionists. I have now received notice of immediate expulsion. The sole reason used to terminate my Labour membership is that in 2016 I shared an innocuous Facebook post and liked the page which posted it. Although part of the Labour Party at that time, the group the page belonged to would go on to be proscribed in 2021. That means it's been banned by the party organisation. Principles of natural justice and procedural fairness ordinarily require that a rule cannot be broken which didn't exist at the time. Apparently not in today's Labour Party. I am proud of my time in the Labour Party, of the many people we've helped in our area, and of the socialist and trade union causes we've furthered. I walk away with my head held high and principles intact. I'm now considering all options available to me, onwards and upwards to the next challenge. So that was those are posts from Councillor Cal Corkery. So yeah, obviously a lot happening that week, and as you said, that's going to be a very, very raw and painful thing for someone as passionate and committed to helping his residents and indeed to his movement as Cal is. That's yeah,
Well, it's
that's
incredible. It's incredible, isn't it? I mean,
mm,
yeah, I think there has been discussions on social media, and it is understandable that this is going to cause a shudder through the local political landscape. If we go back to when Cal was selected, that there was it was coming off the back of the sort of the 2017 election had seen Theresa May's majority crumble. There was a lot of excitement around Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour movement, and lots of new members had joined based on those policies. You saw momentum gaining in strength, and you saw the Yahya was deselected, and again, we don't want to go into speculation and rumor, but there at the time there was noise around that I think we picked up on. It was before we were podcasting that there was some concern around how Yahya had the workload he had taken on as a councillor. So there was a sort of story behind the story. But for me, there is then another dimension to this as we come into the 2019 election, and that is the role of Stephen Morgan MP. So, we've talked about Stephen before being a former Charles Dickens, councillor, and at the time he was
mhm.
elected, in 2019, he was still a sitting councillor. But the interesting thing about Stephen was that in his 2019 campaign, he very much stepped away from the momentum Corbyn, very traditional socialist values, and ran his campaign on a much more centrist standpoint, with massive activist support from the likes of Cal and the folk around at that time, and was one of almost very few Labour MPs to massively increase his majority. So I think when we looked from the outside, as we do, we felt there was always an inherent tension between, shall we say, a grassroots movement that were perhaps more to the left of the Labour movement, and a very successful MP who perhaps sat more in the centre ground. But I think, again, I can only speak for myself. I thought that natural tension had sort of settled itself, and everybody was getting along for the quote unquote good of Labour.
Um, yeah, it's a strange thing. I mean, and Mark in the comments kind of questions why there's no official statement from from the Labour Party. So it does seem like a big step to take place without there being any kind of official announcement. I mean, perhaps I don't know whether that's to do with the timing or whatever. But at the end of the day, yeah, every party has a broad church of a coalition, effectively, of people perhaps in different places, and some are kind of right to the edges of those kind of places. But it does. I don't know. It just seems kind of odd. But
Well,
they are at the end of the day the any political party can mean different things to different people.
mm,
But in order to have electoral success, you need to motivate and mobilize all of those people, regardless of where they are, perhaps on that spectrum within the party, to be able to mobilize, to be able to campaign, to be able to deliver leaflets, to be able to canvass, to be able to, even just to get you decent candidates.
mm.
You need all of those things to happen, and I don't know. It seems an odd thing to have
Well,
such a internal, I don't want to use the word battle, but some, this sort of, and I don't know, the last 5 years seem to have been a flip-flopping around of a similar sort of thing. And I thought those days had gone where actually that had kind of
mm.
been resolved, and we'd moved on perhaps from the Corbyn era. And although Starmer's era is obviously much more of a centrist movement, but nonetheless, there was still a home for people on the left of the party.
Well,
Because without them, what is it?
yeah, and I think, when you talk about the official statement, it popped up on my feed today. But at 5:30 yesterday afternoon, which was after Cal had announced his resignation, Portsmouth Labour were posting photos of our hard-working local campaigners from the Charles Dickens ward, Kirsty Yinker and Cal Corkery. And I kind of scratched my head a little bit, look at this hard-working councillor that we first deselected and then threw out of the organisation. It didn't seem to me to be a very consistent message. And I think, it asks a much bigger question about nationally, because, and I saw this about a year ago. There were some people, and bear in mind, my political position is not unknown to people. I saw some people who I thought were on the very far left, who were saying, "Oh, it's witch hunt. There's no room for socialists in the Labour Party. They've thrown me out." And I thought, well, yeah, you're a bit extremist for my taste. So, I can perhaps see why, the National Labour Party might have gone that far. But for me, a principled socialist, trade unionist, campaigner, hardworking councillor who isn't at those extreme ends, if there's no room for him in the Labour Party, who are the Labour Party? It's such a crisis of identity. I'm stunned.
Yeah, it does make it hard. And I mean, obviously, both of us. I mean, you historically, many years gone by, were a member of the party.
Yep.
But I'm not. We both have political views that, to varying levels, are a distance away from the Labour Party. I would describe myself. I'm a Lib Dem, but I would describe probably myself as more of a democratic socialist than probably members within my own party. But to see, I don't know. I just find it personally. I'm just, I want nothing more than the next general election to resolve in the Tories losing power for some quite considerable time, and for there to be a sensible government that actually looks after the country. Obviously you and I differ on who we think should be best at that and about how that should be done. But I don't know. I start to worry about whether we're heading to another 1992. If this is the sort of battle that is to come, or that is going on for the heart and soul of the party that supposedly is supposedly ready for government, then that worries me, if I'm honest. I don't know what our viewers think.
Yeah, I think it and again, there's a thread for those that want to engage on Portsmouth politics that I kind of threw out there today, because it troubles me that, if people who are genuinely interested and believe something, and it almost doesn't matter what the something is, if there's no room for them in the two largest parties, then, we're trying to one thing we can all agree on is that we want people to care and to vote. And I think that's where, if I look at somewhere like Charles Dickens, and again, I don't want to tar everybody with the same brush, but there is a feeling that you've only got to look at the turnout each year to say that the majority, 80% of Charles Dickens residents, do not care enough to go and place a vote. And I worry that the person for whom I've seen, who they have voted for, and from all that I see from Charles Dickens residents, they are very happy with his support. If the major parties start to deny them the option to vote for or try and deny them their right to vote for their local political representative, I won't bother then.
Well, I mean, I will aside, despite my comment earlier on about the low turnout in Charles Dickens, I don't know how much of that is impacted by, because most of the large scale student accommodation in
Yeah,
the city sits within that ward, and it might be that their turnout percentage is low if actually those students are indeed registered to vote and just don't bother. So that might
yeah,
it might mean that the actual um, the full-time residents, if I can use that term,
yeah.
might not be the kind of cause of the kind of that drop in the demographic. But it's I don't know. I worry about, and that's the thing. And you hear people talking about actually this is kind of is this an output? If we didn't have first past the post, if we had PR, then actually both of our major parties would at least split into two parties each, because there quite clearly is such a broad church that perhaps at times it causes them both issues.
Yep.
And whether that would then actually lead to an open coalition of what policies are and work, rather than that effectively being an internal thing for parties to deal with. I'm just going to have a look to a couple of quotes. So we've got Mark
Mm.
saying in the comments that Keir was described as ruthless by Laura Kunsberg on BBC this morning. Is this a decision in the same mould? A firm vision to win the 50-something-year-old white man vote who voted for Brexit and wouldn't see Cal as a kindred spirit. Do you chaps think
Well,
Keir is ruthless? Are Labour really moving right? I think he means to the right. Is this even linked? And then we have another Facebook user who basically says that Charles Dickens, they live in Charles Dickens, and they use different words, but they say it's not a nice place. So to Mark's point, what do you think of that?
well, I'm a 50-year-old white man. I'm 52,
Yes, am I.
and
But I'm not the
and you
leader of the
didn't.
leader of the Labour Party, nor are you.
No, no, but I guess the question is, again, am I a Brexit supporter? No, I would have preferred Remain, but I was happy to get behind Brexit once the vote was cast. So, is Sir Keir Starmer looking for my vote? If he is, he's going to have to look a bit harder, because I think the point that if he's missed anything, he's missed the fact that I value integrity. And integrity means that I don't have to agree with you. I don't have to have the same views as you, but I respect your right to have them and to take part in the democratic process. So there's an element of, again, he'd have to go a lot further to get my vote. And it's interesting, Cal is a very strong trade unionist and, regularly appears on picket lines, showing solidarity. Keir would have to go so far away from the Labour Party's traditional relationship with the trade unions to get my vote. There wouldn't be a Labour Party left, because that's where all their money comes from.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, parties win elections by successfully appealing to a broad base, and that broad base is statistically in the centre, because that's, to be honest, where most people are, because you're not that distant from, even if there are some things that you're talking about they disagree with, they're not that extreme to be enough to put them off of the parts of your policies that
Yep.
they agree with. If he's trying to catch lightning in a bottle and do what Johnson did, he's not going to be able to do that, because Johnson does what Johnson does, was able to sell completely different things to different people. He's a really, really effective campaigner, but he was able to tell, the people in the red wall seats one set of things, the people in London something kind of completely different. And all of these things were, depending on how much you support or agree with him as to whether those were sound bites and or even honest. Keir's not going to be able to do that. So in that sense, he's already trying to roller skate with only one set of skates, because
But I guess
against that sort of populism, anything that he does is going to look boring, is going to look really kind of boring. But this is the different thing. This isn't, you don't have any policies. What are you actually standing for? This is almost who are your friends?
Well, and that's the piece for me. I don't. In this, if this is the tone of the Labour Party, I don't think it's ruthless. I think it's feckless, and it actually goes back to, it's a different group to turn on. I thought that the Labour Party's disdain for the Brexit voter in their red wall seats of they're stupid, they're ignorant, they're racists, they'll come back, they'll come back, and we'll keep telling them they're stupid until they do. Well, that failed spectacularly. The fact is that if you are a left of centre socialist and trade unionist, why would you pick a fight with that group? I get if there are real extremists, the anti-Semitism question, or extreme far left. Yes, you've got to root that out, but that's a world of difference to purging yourself of your core baseline demographic of quote unquote working class trade union supporting socialists. You I don't
Yeah,
understand why you'd stick your thumb in your mate's eye.
indeed. And that's a question, I guess, that goes to the heart of that. So, as the year goes on, we'll and as we've said, we've invited Cal to come on and have his say, if and when there's at some point in the future where he feels that's not as raw, and it's something that he'd like to talk about. But it's not, this issue isn't going away, and indeed,
Nope.
obviously, Councillor Smythe is still suspended with with that investigation either
Yep.
ongoing or pending. So there'll be the outcome of that to deal with. It just seems that at a time where last year Labour gained seats in the local elections, and seemed to be making progress after, to be honest with you, what seemed like years of perhaps slow gains. Would I say
Mostly stagnation, I would say.
yeah, or stagnation. To then last year they had a really good, a good year. Let's be honest. We can all count. We could all see how well they did
Yep.
last year. But then to this year, despite the local, the Tory party locally, as they did last year, feeling the effect of disaffection for the national Conservative government, likely to feel, likely to have the same of the same
It ain't gonna help.
same thing directed at them from the local public. And with several of their kind of key campaigners and their key councillors deciding to stand down this time, you'd have thought now, if anything, would be the time where you might start to see perhaps it's possible numerically that the Tories shrink back to the point that and if the Labour Party has make enough gains in May, that they become the official opposition in Portsmouth.
Could have happened.
Things like it could have happened, but it doesn't look like it at the minute, does it?
Can't see it happening now. No, and again, I think there's more of it to come as we get into the run into the hustings and the local elections in May. It will be very interesting to see whether Cal appears on a ballot paper anywhere, what it says to the right of his name, and obviously Cal has, it's been very clear to us that Cal has been very supportive, encouraging in that sort of coaching, mentoring role to other candidates who are now councillors. And again, a thought for them, they must be absolutely torn, between the loyalty to somebody who's been very supportive of them and the party that has effectively thrown their best mate into the street. So again,
Yeah.
we won't go into that in any detail, but our thoughts are with them, because well, what a bloody mess. Again,
It's a bit shit, isn't it?
it's not great. It's not great. So shall we veer quickly from local shenaniganery to your friend and mine, in theory, the lovable Rishi and his 5 things: promises, commitments,
promises, pledges. It depends on who you listen to and as to how they describe it. But these were the 5 pledges. So do you want me to read them out?
Building blocks for the future was, I
Or
think, how he
is
described
that the phrase that we're going for now? Okay. So he's
I
buying
think
loads of
so.
Lego.
I think there is an element of Lego, or possibly Duplo bricks. So a Duplicitus, is that a thing? I've stretched that.
I see. You've really stretched
Yeah.
that, but that was good. I'll give you points for that. So
So I've got
pledge.
them here in front of me.
Oh, you've got them. Okay.
Yeah. So pledge 1 is to halve inflation by the end of the year. So inflation peaking at around 10.7%. Let's be honest, everyone's hated it. Cost of living rocketing, painful for everyone. Looking to halve it and looking to head back towards the target of 2%, which is what the Bank of England were tasked with doing. I'm not sure they're going to get too many bonuses this year. So that's pledge. It almost sounds like Bully's prize board. So in 1, half inflation. I think everyone would like that.
I don't think there's anybody that isn't in favour of that. The question is, how much of this is here because your predecessor basically took a magic 8-ball to government policy and took a torch to the economy in the process of doing it, making a bad situation really, really worse. Yeah, I don't know. Aren't these things? Isn't this meant to be happening by the end of the year anyway?
Well, and again, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because inflation is one of these things where we need a fully trained economist on, because the fact is that inflation globally rocketed, and again, there are factors in play to that. For some people it will be all about Brexit. For others it will be, Liz was always keen to talk about Vladimir, and for others it will be her economic policy. But it was big. It should be smaller. I think we're all good with that. But as to whether it's, well, I'm going to make you a steadfast promise that the sun will rise tomorrow. Maybe that was going to happen anyway. So let's move on to 2. So 2 is growing the economy. Now this was Liz's big thing, kind of linked to levelling up. And as you know, Liz and who was her chap? I think I've erased his name from my mind. Kwasi Kwarteng, the mad chancellor, who said, "I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll mortgage the house and we'll stick it all on red." And the markets, I don't think, were keen on that growth strategy. And as we know, that all failed spectacularly. So growing the economy all sounds good. Unfortunately, the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, suggests that this year we're actually going to be in a bit of a recession, that things are going to contract by 1.4%, and that unemployment could rise by as much as 500,000. So if the first one was a kind of gimme, this second one feels a little bit aspirational. That's the kind word, isn't it?
Is that a euphemism for just made up?
Oh, it's a little bit of a. We'll get to the end of 5 and we'll look at them in the whole. So
we'll look at them in the round. Yeah,
exactly. Number 3 is national debt falling. Oh, to a fiscal conservative, what brings a tear to my eye? National debt falling. Oh, I'd love a bit of that. I guess my only nervousness as the fiscal conservative in the room is Rishi's track record on fiduciary prudence. It's not cast iron, is it? He was perhaps a bit more loose with his financial position.
I know we take different views. I think a lot of the things that he did during the COVID pandemic were things that the government needed to do in a time of crisis. I know they're things that naturally don't sit with necessarily things that you agree with. The things that I took issue with were basically the utter lack of control and the and the kind of the backdoor priority routes of the the basically the contracts to the mates with no experience in the business kind of things, is that it's basically just the mismanagement of effectively just pouring billions of pounds of money on ineffective PPE down the drain that's now either got to be dumped or burned. So it's those are things kind of I'd take issue with, but it's so in that kind of respect, it's almost like to his home crowd, he's a guy that gives away loads of money from the government, which isn't something that plays well with his home crowd. To everybody else, he's just a rich guy that looks after rich guys. So it's kind of like who's his target audience and who's actually gonna like it.
Well, and that's your thing, isn't it? Again, if I look at it, the furlough scheme, which we touched on before, I get it in terms of supporting proper human beings in their house, paying their bills and feeding their families. That bit I get. I actually get the arse when really big corporations or medium-sized corporations have taken £20 million worth of government money for the furlough scheme, and at the end of the year declare a £20 million profit. Well, hang about. I know where that £20 million came from. And so it's that kind of lack of financial control that troubles me. And I guess whilst it might get me excited, because I love a bit of tight fiscal prudence, with the general electorate, the all times is hard, we're going to have to not spend money and be a bit I can't see that winning too many votes.
No, I don't think after COVID and then after a period of high inflation, us suddenly saying we need to trim the purse strings a bit, or we need to trim the purse strings a lot. Yeah, that's not exactly going to get people flocking to their polling station with their photo ID.
But the next one, everyone's going to love this. Everyone's going to love this. Falling NHS waiting lists.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, none of these are things that you would see any politician campaigning against. there isn't any, and this is the thing that I found strange, is there is no politician out there that is going to campaign about increasing inflation or about not growing the economy or about increasing our debt or campaigning to increase our debt or campaigning to increase waiting lists or indeed to increase the number of small boats. These, to me, they don't, I don't know, to me, they seem like the sort of things I've seen throughout the course of my working life in project meetings that mean absolutely jack all, don't ever bloody happen. And the person that's responsible wants you to forget by the time you come around to realizing that they haven't done the things that they said they were going to do.
Crumbs. So cynical in one so young. Good
I
Lord.
know.
So the waiting is coming down. I think for balance, there was an element of, and I think we might hear from Rishi in a minute. He's not a guest, but we'll hear from him anyway. There's a little bit back to number one, that the 2-year waiters are gone and the 18-month waiters are coming down and the 12-month waiters will be. So there is a little bit of we're going to claim victory for the stuff that we might just have happened anyway. And there was some, again, I don't think it's any secret to say that there are staff shortages and pretty low morale in, the front line of the NHS at the moment. And the sort of structured policy to address that would, that's not been forthcoming yet, which brings us to number 5. If you're a Telegraph or Daily Mail reader, stop the boats. That's playing to that home crowd, isn't it? That's a clarion call to Middle England.
It's playing to a particular type of era. I mean, I'll quote Mark Coates, who says in our comments that he says the Tories have lost their economical prudence label, and 1 to 3 are all about sewing it back on. You might as well say we've fixed the mistakes we have made. The NHS is quite the challenge. I'm not sure what he talks about. Lee Anderson had an interesting and insane idea about not letting doctors leave the country. And finally, 5 is unlikely to be ethical. Braverman is a loose cannon and could endanger even safe seats, ultimately about getting the UKIP stroke reform vote. So it's not kind of getting him. Raymond says he will be lucky to get 1 out of 5. So I don't know how many star reviews he's likely to get on Amazon, but
it's
Yeah,
not looking great for him. And to be fair, the whole thrust of the stop the boats is still on the, well, once we take them out of the boat, we'll stick them on another boat, we'll stick them in a plane, and we'll send them somewhere else. Which, as we touched on when we looked at the whole, the whole policy of Priti Patel, and we've got these jumbo jets lined up to fill with people, and I didn't bother to look whether any have actually ever left for Rwanda, but I think there's an
I think the
element.
plane might have left. It just didn't have any passengers on it.
Any passengers on it? No. So if again, you've got to look at it in the round, but I think it comes to something we touched on earlier in the podcast, which is you got no money to give away. Your predecessor tried the wacky economic approach of let's go all in and take a high risk strategy for growth. That crashed and burned. So I guess the question for Rishi is kind of, what was he ever going to stand up and say that was going to get anybody excited? So, and it would appear that
I don't know. Yes,
Raymond and Mark haven't been moved, but I'm not sure I was expecting them to.
yeah, the key thing for me, and it kind of speaks to what Mark's point was that was really that, to me, a party that prides itself on understanding or being supporters of the idea of a free market and a free market economy, and that there are market-based solutions. They don't understand how the market works. The reason why there are people coming across the boats is supply and demand. There is a demand. You can't just cut off the supply and expect the demand to go away. That's what happened when they dealt with the trucks and dealt with the camp at Calais, because the demand was still there. All they've done is actually increase the demand, if anything, by closing down all of the legal routes of processing people. But their approach is the same with drugs. Their approach is the same with house building. Their approach is the same with staff in the NHS. It's all about supply and demand. If you don't create supply while there's demand, you have problems. If you don't have demand, at the end of the day, you've got to deal with both of those things. Otherwise, you're effectively not a good retailer, are you? Because you can't sell things you haven't got, and you're not going to make any
No,
money selling things that no one wants. So
no,
I just think that it's you guys are the master of the economy, but you don't get the fact that supply and demand is a key thing with the housing crisis, or even a key part of all of the other things that I mentioned. But you can go on about, well, if nurses don't like the amount that they get paid, they can go away and get a different job. And when they do, you'll then complain that we haven't got any nurses. Well, that's because you told them
yeah,
to bugger off and get a job in Lidl. What
yeah,
what
and,
do you expect to happen?
well,
They can't
and
feed their kids on claps on a Thursday night. Sorry, I'm going off
yeah,
on one.
no, and to be fair, that's a whole other show, isn't it? In
It is
terms
indeed.
of
It is indeed.
well,
Should we?
in terms of kind of where that's at. But Rishi set out his 5 building blocks for the future. Should we give him the final word on this one?
Yeah, just a quick one though. Mark asked us, do we think that Reform UK, or whatever they're called this week, are actually a threat to Rishi?
No.
Do we think?
No, and to be fair, in the same way that again, I could ask that, and not in the same way. So I'm not being playful for comic effect. I don't think the Lib Dems are a threat to Labour. I think the challenge, and there's another whole show in this, is that even if Labour go and shoot all the trade unionists, those people aren't going to go to the Lib Dems. They might go to the Greens, but the problem that we've got at the moment with it is only going to be a Labour or a Conservative government next time out, and if it has to be a coalition, then
I use the C word.
well, and that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, I've always taken that view that the Lib Dems, when they were in coalition, put the brakes on a lot of the more extreme Conservative position. They got through an awful lot of what they, of socially progressive arrangements, and the electorates beat them to death over tuition fees, which are an absolute abstract nonsense because the vast majority of people will never repay them. But that was enough for the Lib Dems to get massacred. So reform, what are they going to do? They'll make some noise. I'm sure there's some areas where they might take votes off the Tories, but I think they're going to be another irrelevance. They'll be like there's been before, won't they? There's been pockets of parties on the right end of right, probably back to the 70s. They'll come and they'll go. That's my view.
Okay, well, they'll go far, and the sooner and the further, the better. Right, let's hear what Rishi had to say. And this was part of basically the press conference that was the end of his speech announcing the 5 key pledges, stroke targets, stroke goals, stroke wishes. And this excerpt comes on the back of a question that was asked of him by Gary Gibbon of Channel 4 News. So let me just play it and see what people think.
My expectation is that we will be able to halve the rate of inflation by the end of this year. On our path, by the way, to restoring inflation back to where it belongs, which is 2% inflation target that we set the Bank of England. But I'm keen to deliver on the plans that we've set out that we'll see inflation halving, as I said, by the end of this year. And at the same time, I'd like the economy to be growing by then as well. So those 2 goals are both for this year. In terms of debt falling, we already have got plans in place to make sure that debt does fall in the medium term. The key is sticking to those and making sure that we have the discipline to do so, because that's not always easy, but it's the right thing to do to secure the future of public services and indeed to combat inflation. And then regard to NHS waiting times. So last year, we practically eliminated people waiting over 2 years. Because of the plans that we've put in place that increase the amount of elective activity we have that I talked a little bit about, we are on track to eliminate the waits for 1.5 years practically by about April of this year. And by spring of next year, we will have practically eliminated those waiting over a year, with the overall waiting list falling. And then lastly, we're keen to introduce legislation as soon as practically possible. Ultimately, Parliament decides how long it takes to pass that legislation. But in all of these things, I've deliberately not put a specific month on each of them, because I don't think that's responsible or the right thing to do with goals that are so complicated, where many of the forces that will impact our ability to hit them are out of my control as well.
Yeah. So we'll move on.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been. I think it's where we were at, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Some are going to be easy, some are going to be hard, and I'm not promising anything. So yeah, it's a building block. It's a foundation. Every journey begins and all that, and other such trite arrangements. So we're on to. It's only January, but the run into May. Wow, it's full on, isn't it?
Yeah, so we sat down and planned out basically our spring season. And I know this might come as a shock to people, but occasionally we do actually plan the shows. So we looked at basically counting back from May the 4th, which is when the local elections are this year. And no, you cannot go to the polling station with your lightsaber. And basically, if we count back from that, bearing in mind that we usually need to spend about 6 or 7 weeks doing hustings, some weeks 1 a week, some weeks 2 a week, depending on how many wards people are candidates are up for doing hustings. And just to say, again, like we've done in previous years, any ward where we've got at least 2 candidates that we can get to agree on a date, we'll do an online hustings with them. So that is there, and we'll be contacting the local parties and representatives shortly in order to basically open our door and start hopefully receiving invites and sorting those out. But when you kind of count backwards from then, bearing in mind, I think we were hoping to do something different on the last Sunday before the election. So when you kind of count backwards, and then you bear in mind that the council's the budget is actually on the 28th of February. So that's when Portsmouth City Council meet in full council to argue and then agree on what money is going to be spent on for the coming financial year. That's the 23-24 financial year, and therefore also what the council tax is going to be. Once you kind of remove that, you only actually have about a week or two between the budget taking place and that 7 week period, that 6 or 7 week period. And also for some of those weeks, it will be before the close of nominations. So that's the deadline by which parties or individuals have to submit their application to be a candidate in the local elections. That's 4 p.m. on the 4th of April. So it's actually quite a tight kind of timescale when you kind of slide down. And we've only got 5 weeks until the budget. So we worked that out and thought, oh, hang on a minute. Pretty much the first part of this year, pretty much like actually other years, is also is basically going to be a countdown to the locals. Some other kind of, the other key event, the kind of key things that we'd want to talk about in that period of time. There's going to be a change to voter requirements when you go to the polling station. So when you vote in person, normally you don't even need to take your polling card, but if you can, if you want. But from this year, you'll also need to take a form of photo ID, and we're going to do a show about that. And about making sure that people know what they need to take, because otherwise you will get turned away and you won't be able to vote unless you go back with your photo ID. And also, sadly, the 24th of February is also going to be the 1 year anniversary of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So we'll be visiting that and inviting Paul Flenley back on the show to give his expertise. But we'll also be inviting any local groups that have been doing things to support the people in Ukraine, but also if there's any Ukraine refugees that are living in Portsmouth or in the area that wanted to come on and share their experiences, we'd love to hear from them. So yeah, we've got a packed year.
Yeah, and I think
it's
interesting. Half year. The other thing that's just struck me as you've been reading that out is obviously historically, whilst the 28th is the grand gathering of the clans to vote the Lib Dem budget through, and there's usually a lot of hearing and hawing, but most of the real stuff's been done amongst the group leaders in smoke-filled, darkened rooms prior to that.
I mean, there won't be smoke filled because no one's allowed to smoke in council premises, but nor to use a vape machine or a smoke machine. But I get the imagery that you're going for. But yeah, I mean, don't forget last year, wasn't it basically there was a last minute amendment that was put forward by, I forget who it was on the Lib Dem side, but on the Labour side, it was Graham Heaney. Basically that effectively allowed the budget to go through and be kind of voted for, and that seemed to come out of the blue for some people, and there seemed to be a bit of a stir about that. So it will be interesting because obviously cost of living and inflationary rises are going to be impacting the council and their workforce, so they're going to be facing increasing pay demands for their workforce, and indeed for their subcontractors. They're going to feel exactly the same, but at the same time, there's also the issue of the prices of things that they need to buy are going up. The money from central government is still isn't kind of necessarily going up to reflect that. And do they again put in a council tax pricing, increase of the maximum amount they can do without having to have a referendum on it, that they've done each year going back as far as I can remember for the last few years? I don't know, but it's going to be a tricky one. Maybe that's where the fight is.
But I guess my observation is there isn't a Labour group leader.
Well, there will be one. I don't know who though yet, but there will have to be one. So the council. So what? Depending on what their standing orders for their own group is, but they themselves will vote another of their basically one of their existing councillors to be a leader of that group, or whether that just de facto goes to whoever the deputy. I'm not sure actually who the current deputy
Well,
is, but
yeah,
but you know,
and
they'll need to do that, but obviously without Cal's and without Judith's votes.
because they've got 8 councillors, 9, 8.
I thought it was
If we
9.
include Jennifer, 9.
So it's
So they're
9, so it's
down
gone
to
down to
7.
7. Mm.
They're down to 7.
Mm.
And as I say, it would be very interesting to see whether every councillor stays aligned to the party rather than the people. Yeah, so who knows? There could be. It's not beyond the wit of possibility that there could be a Lib Dem group, a Conservative group, a Labour group, a Portsmouth Independence group, and an independent group.
Independent group. Yes.
Mm.
So yeah, we
They
could.
would only need one more to join forces with them. I won't think there's if Judith and Cal are aligned in the same way you touched on them early, the Portsmouth People, Progressive People group, were a 2-person group.
Yeah. So that's the thing is there's a difference. There's a difference in kind of representation for having a group and a political party.
Mm.
The difference being that if you're a group, you're a grouping, and so therefore that means that you get counted in regards to the apportionment of representation on panels and committees within the council. But the key distinction that, and I'm sure there are others, so someone else is probably just about to school me and make me look really stupid. But the other key distinction is that political parties are able to access the closed part of the voter register. So other organizations like basically any, for example, like an insurance company can pay to have access to the open register. So people that have registered to vote but have chosen not to remain on the open register won't be in that set of data. Political parties still get access to and all the voter register says is who someone is, what their voter ID is, and what their address is in which ward in the city. It doesn't tell you anything else, anything else at all. So in that respect, there's that kind of piece of information that you get. How many people that is of the electoral roll, I don't know. I haven't got data on it, but it's there's that kind of distinction. But yeah, so there's a lot going on. But that voter ID thing, I think, I don't know. That seems, unless there's a lot of noise made about it between now and May, that's going to be quite a bloody shock to people on the day.
Could well be. So I think we've got plenty to cover. Again, thank you to everyone who's chipped in and contributed on the comments. Again, I think it's all relatively tumultuous, and I think we're going to have to. We might have to be a bit agile in terms of how we cover topics as the world tends to change. I mean, it'll teach us to plan, won't it? It's not something we do very often.
Well, no, but hopefully things aren't going to be this dramatic all the time, so it will be easy to plan. But there'll always be times to schedule things in and work things out. But yeah, so Sai's just given us a comment in there. Saying it's terrible that you can opt out of the full register but still get added to party mailing lists. But if you tell those parties though that you don't want to hear from them, they have to by law not mail you. So they have to not send you addressed information. The question, the probably the wobbly thing then is you can also ask them to make sure that they don't put leaflets through your door which aren't addressed. But that obviously isn't as foolproof as your address being physically removed from a database when a mail merge is being done for some letters. That obviously kind of works. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. But all things to play for. But just a shout out, if you are if you are going to be a candidate in May's local elections and would like to take part in one of our hustings, please do reach out to us, either message us directly on Facebook or send us an email to studio@pppodcast.uk. and you can find any of those details actually on our website. But please do get in touch, because we'd love to hear from you, and the sooner we can start getting things scheduled in for that, you'll be surprised how quickly it becomes the end of March and people are starting to panic.
Yeah.
So please do reach out. We'd love to have you on board, and the more wards that we can cover, the better we think for the chance for the voters of Portsmouth to get to hear what you've got to say.
Yeah, 1 year we'll do all 14 and kill ourselves. It's something to look forward to. We've got one Portsmouth Independent and one Conservative who have already reached out. So yeah, but who knows who we might have before the end of March. So I think it would be appropriate to just end the show with a thanks from ourselves on behalf of the people of Charles Dickens and the Conservative. It is not a glamorous job being a local councillor, and I think from the podcast we'd like to thank Cal for the work that he's done in that ward and for always being open to us and for giving us a different perspective. And I think we both wish him well in whatever he chooses to do next.
Indeed, whatever that future might be. And as we say, the door's there. And indeed from Councillor Smythe, if either of them want to talk about it, then it will be interesting to hear their views. And as hopefully anybody knows, we're not a point scoring kind of show. We're quite clear about what where our support is, but the door's there and the microphone's there for anybody of any political party, and we like our guests to actually have a chance to say, because we fundamentally believe that our audience want to hear them instead of us.
Indeed. So on that bombshell, you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Join us next week at 6:27.